It's Matt Kirkner on the Tech Ed Podcast. One of the biggest questions that we get here on the Tech Ed Podcast, particularly from educators and particularly from those in the K-12 space, in the community college space, and that is this. They see these great learning labs that are going in. They see these amazing investments that are being made in the future of STEM and technical education. So many times those are funded by government grants, by referenda, and so on. But a lot of them are funded by private donations, by organizations, individuals, foundations, philanthropists, companies that are interested in doing good for all the right reasons, interested in doing what we say here on the podcast is securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. That is the topic today with my dear friend, Michael Frohna. Michael is now the founder and vice president of Humaner. We'll talk a little bit about that. He's had just some incredible opportunities to lead different organizations. I got to know Michael when he was the president of Junior Achievement of Wisconsin. And so, Michael, first of all, just thank you so much for coming in. It's a real pleasure to have you on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Well, you're most welcome, and thanks for that gracious introduction.
I want you to talk with our audience just a little bit about your background. You've done foundation work. You've been involved in education. You ran a significant nonprofit, mission-driven nonprofit here in the state of Wisconsin. And now you're doing some great work with Humaner in terms of assisting organizations in terms of their development, not just philanthropic, but also in terms of leadership development and so on. Walk us through a little bit of your career and your background so our audience gets a flavor for who you are.
What may surprise some people is I was going to be a high school teacher.
Yeah.
And in my junior practicum, I was in a classroom with a group of students, as you might imagine, and there was one student. I'll never forget him. His name was Rodney. And Rodney was the kind of student who was never really prepared for anything. And it was the day that they were supposed to give their speech and be videotaped so that they could reflect on how good or how poorly they did.
Okay.
Well, Rodney wasn't ready. The cooperating teacher took a video camera about the size of a small suitcase at the time, put it in Rodney's face while he sat at his desk and said, "Come on, Rodney, what are you going to do? Give your speech or follow your old man into the automobile repair business?" And Rodney never sat very tall or stood very tall, but he shrunk that day. And I thought in my 20-some-year-old mind, why is it that education has to be defined for every student by four walls? Isn't there more opportunity? And so I decided then that I wasn't going to be a teacher, but I still wanted to move people from point A to point B. And the most natural place I found for that was in philanthropy, because gifts allow organizations to do things that they couldn't do otherwise, and it allows individuals to do things they couldn't do on their own. So my career started with thinking I was going to be an educator, but I've stayed involved in education in many ways throughout my career, and I just really enjoyed helping raise millions of dollars for organizations around basically the Midwest.
Well, and you think about how that investment reverberates over and over and over again, and whether you're investing in a young person like Rodney, thinking about his future, whether you're investing in some of the organizations that you've been involved with that are really doing all of this for the right reasons, the multiplicative effect of having all of those investments resonate over and over and over again, so very important. It's interesting that you mentioned and talk about raising millions of dollars. I know that perked our audience interest up, and I know you're not just saying that you've actually done that, and you're just got this incredible way about you. You know, I've seen you work with organizations, and you never feel like you're certainly not begging, but even asking for money. It's all about, inspiring people to do the right things for the right reasons. So I want to talk about that a little bit if I'm a K-12 educator, if I'm a school district superintendent, I'm a provost at a university and so on. What are those kinds of things that inspire people to be involved in giving?
What I have found to be most inspiring, I want to go back to what I said just a moment ago, is we allow people to do something that they couldn't do on their own, that they already value a high quality education, access to resources, solving a community-wide problem. So they look maybe at homelessness and they think, I can't do anything about that on my own, but I can join these other organizations through my philanthropy, through my board service, through my volunteerism, that really helps organizations advance from where they are to where they need to be. That's one area. So make sure we're providing dreams and aspirations. Without a dream or an aspiration, philanthropy becomes very dull. Most philanthropists, I believe, want to help an organization do more of something, not the same as something.
Sure.
But there is a difference between doing more of something and continuing to have to innovate. And I think that's one of the traps, and maybe we'll get that a little bit, get to that a little bit further in the episode, Matt, is that nonprofits have a limited bandwidth. And when we expect philanthropy to have them keep doing things over and over and different and more, that tends to burn out organizations. And there's a danger to that. But we can talk about that maybe a little bit more.
No, and that's really, really interesting. You think about the idea of board service, and I'm blessed to be able to serve on a number of nonprofit boards. I'm involved in the foundation board at one of our local technical colleges here in Southeast Wisconsin. We just had Hector Colon, who's the CEO of Lutheran Social Services, on the podcast, and I serve on Hector's board. I serve on the board of the American Technical Education Association. I serve on the board of the Smart Automation Certification Alliance. Those are just a handful of the 501c3s that I've been involved with. And you're exactly right. You think about volunteerism, you think about making a difference. And I'll be honest, I really admire the people that like get up and go work at the soup kitchen or, work one-on-one with people in need. And that's just not my gift. It's not my comfort zone, but more on the, the strategic direction, the financial management, working with the CEO on that day when they get the really bad news and just need to be pepped up a little bit. That's just so incredibly rewarding. And then you think about the philanthropy that I do on a really, really super small scale, certainly not at the scale of some of the folks that you're talking about here, but we're all involved in giving, whether it's to our church or to an association or organization that we think is important. And just the sense of satisfaction that comes along with that, of making a difference and helping that organization. And then it is that balance between if an organization is already doing something great and they're coming and looking for a gift, it's like, well, what are we going to do with that? And how is that going to benefit even more people? How is that going to help you grow? And making sure that we're inspiring folks around that type of giving, really, really important. I think one of the things we talk about on the education side, I get a lot of educators that come to me, Michael, and say, I'm interested in building a relationship with my industrial employers. And, how should I go about doing that? We don't speak the same language. We don't, where do I get started? And so we coach a lot of organizations on checking the agenda at the door and being honest up front about the fact that maybe, a PLC in education means a professional learning community, and manufacturing, it means a programmable logic controller, right? We don't use the same language all the time. What are some of those misunderstandings in your experience that, not just in education, but in general, that maybe people have about philanthropy, why people give, and how we should use that in some of our strategic thinking?
I think there's a misconception that people give for two primary reasons: a charitable tax deduction and recognition. And those things aren't necessarily unimportant, but they fall down way, way down on the list.
Right.
The first three things that we see over and over again: number one, there's trusted leadership. A person will look to the organization, and whether that's the CEO, the board, a lead teacher, whatever it is, can I trust that person to do with my gift what I hope they would do with it?
Got it.
The second is a vision. They are not looking to fund a need. Organizations and individuals generally want to fund a vision.
Yep.
So when you show up at the front door of a potential giver and you ask them that you need a piece of equipment, that's not nearly as attractive as if you say, we're trying to get 45 students ready for their certification,
Interesting.
or 100 students ready for their career-bound or college-bound experience. And the third reason is because they're asked.
Okay.
It's the number one fear of fundraising is people say, oh, I could never do that. And what's strange, Matt, over these years that I've been doing this, 3 decades now, I can't sell anybody a raffle ticket because that feels like a transaction.
Okay.
But you asked me to talk to somebody about $1 million gift, that feels like a relationship, and that's transformation. So that's where I like to focus is, are we helping people? Can they trust us?
Right.
Will we do what have a grander vision? And will we ask them? And in fact, when we ask people, hey, you're given to that organization and you really like them, why don't you give more? They'll usually respond something like well, I've not been asked for more.
Interesting.
I only upset one donor one time in asking for a gift. And you know why?
What's that?
Didn't ask him for enough.
Interesting.
He was insulted that my ask and my invitation was too low.
Wasn't enough money.
So that's the great paradox in fundraising. Many people not only dread asking for money, they detest the idea of even thinking about asking for me for money. But on the flip side of that, people love to give.
Yeah, interesting.
And so we've got a person in a position to invite who doesn't, and a person who wants to give who can't. And so we try to put those together.
Fascinating. I, as you were mentioning that, and you know, it being asked and being asked for enough. There's an old book. I forget how old it is. Think and Grow Rich is the name of the book. Is written by a guy named Napoleon Hill. And there is a poem in that book that has just always stuck with me. And it's about, quote, bargaining with life for a penny. And I can't recite the poem. I wish I could. But the whole idea is that life will give you way more than a penny if you ask it. Whatever you ask of life, it will give you. But you have to ask it and be willing to put the work in. I mean, if you ask life for a penny, that's what you're going to get. If you ask life for $1 million, that, you know, then you have a much better chance of getting your $1 million. And just as you were talking about that and being willing to ask for enough, it just really reminded me of the importance of being comfortable asking for what it is that you want, but doing it in the right way. Your analogy or your story about selling a raffle ticket versus inspiring somebody to give, I love that. I will tell you that I am one of those people that doesn't like asking people for gifts, you know, and as I get involved in these nonprofits, a lot of times if you have a decent sized network, they want to funnel you into the stewardship side of the organization, right? And you
Yes.
make introductions to high net worth people that might be willing to give. And I'm always happy to make that connection. If there's somebody in my network that I can say, hey, you know, talk with so-and-so about what they're doing, happy to do that. I'm super uncomfortable sitting down and saying, and asking that person themselves for the money. How do you get over that?
Well, you're not alone in that.
Okay.
And fortunately, there are enough people who can do that, because that creates some job security for people in the
Right.
development field.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Where I think it comes down to, quite candidly, is silencing the old tapes that we play about money.
Yep.
And there is something we all carry. And I ask people, what is your earliest memory of how money was used in your home? And most people think it was they say, well, it's for necessities. I remember my mother who said, you know, we need to save this. We need to use this money for groceries. I remember my dad, you know, maybe taking a second job so he could pay the bills. Very few of us grew up in an environment where, maybe the exception of your house of worship, you saw money be given away. So it's not a practice we have. The second thing is, we associate money with power in some cases. And so we don't want to be in a situation where we feel less than and not equal to,
Yeah.
or even greater than. And I'll tell you, just as an aside, the number of people who have given the organization I was working with $1 million or more, who then apologized that it wasn't enough, I could write pages on that.
Wow.
And so they don't even see it about the money. They see it about an opportunity.
Sure.
And then the third is, oftentimes people will see philanthropy as a reward system. Maybe they grew up where every A they got on their report card, they got 50 cents. Believe it or not, we take these things that we learned very early on into the professional realm and say, I can't ask this person for money for all these various reasons. And it's a misnomer.
Yeah, the misnomer completely. One of the things that I love about your approach to this, Michael, is super, super data driven. And, you know, from the very first conversations that we had about philanthropy, you're quoting these, you know, national statistics and these studies that come out regularly. I think there was one you mentioned to me a week or so ago that was just published. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about the data. Let's talk about what the information is telling us. And there were some things that, you know, you've educated me on over the course of time that really surprised me. What are some of those things that would surprise our audience?
First is, how much money is actually donated every year in the United States? I asked that question to many audiences over the year, and I'll receive guesses, estimates of maybe 100 million, maybe 10 billion. But when I tell them, or when we take the data from Giving USA, which is out of the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University,
and we can link that in the show notes, right?
yeah,
Is
that would be
public
that would,
information?
yes, it is
We'll throw
public
that in there.
information.
Okay,
It'd be
great.
great to put in there. They're surprised to learn that in 2025, 617 billion with a B
Wow.
dollars were contributed. That is $19,500 a second,
Wow.
or almost $1.2 million a minute. So if philanthropy was dependent only on the availability of resources,
Sure.
there would be plenty.
Yeah. Interesting.
But we don't seem to think about it that way. The other thing that most people are surprised by is what amount of each dollar donated is given by individuals.
Okay.
We have this idea that a lot is given by companies, but it's not. 64 cents this past year of every dollar donated was by a living individual.
Wow.
19%, so 19 cents of every dollar was given by foundations.
Okay.
10% was given through bequests. And I
Yep.
want to come back to that
Okay.
in a minute.
Yep.
and about 7% was given by
Just
corporations.
7. Amazing.
Just 7%. I say this tongue in cheek, but I usually say dead people are giving more than corporations.
Interesting.
But
So a bequest, by the way, because I think our audience knows all those other things. A bequest would be somebody leaving it in
their
will.
estate plan or in
Okay,
their
yeah.
will. And I say that jokingly because many people who are in a position to do that through their life estate have made their money and their resources through company
Of
giving.
course.
So it's a bit tongue in cheek. I don't mean to disparage, in fact, any giving level, because it's all very generous.
Yeah, well, and even, I mean, you think about a bequest. I mean, that is an individual too, but that is, by and large been inspired by something. It just happens to be, that gift is taking place after their death. Then the other huge percentage by individuals, and even the foundations. I mean, I've engaged with a lot of foundations, and if you're an organization that creates a foundation, you have a tremendous amount of influence over where that money is invested as well.
Yes.
So it really is. It's less about going to the top 10 companies on the Fortune 500 or whatever list you want to use, and saying can we have a gift. It's more about inspiring an individual to give. And I want to talk a little bit more about that now, Michael. Is this whole idea of, and you talked about some of the things that inspire people to give, and it's not what you would necessarily think, and it's not about a tax deduction and so on. That one always drives me crazy anyway. Well, they're just taking a tax deduction on that. Yeah, but you're still giving the money, right? I mean, whatever your tax deduction is even if you're in the highest bracket, is a fraction of that total gift. But talk about what inspires people to want to give. If I'm an individual in this case in an educational institution, and I want to build a relationship with a philanthropist or somebody that's going to support my organization, and I want to inspire them toward an interest in giving, what are those things that drive that?
I've made this mistake in my career, and I see it repeated still to this day by others, is we are so driven sometimes in the world of philanthropy to get that gift, we forget to tell people what we did with it afterwards.
Interesting.
And the next time we see them, we consider it stewardship to go back to them and say, thank you for your last gift. Now give us your next gift.
Yep.
And there is a gap in between that invitation and that reception of the gift on how we inform and how we keep people engaged in that. Story, and what was really memorable for me, I thought I was doing all the right things to provide this right kind of leverage and recognition for a very significant organization, business in Wisconsin. And the gentleman, I was talking to the CEO, a little nervous, little green behind the ears. And I said, and if you give this gift, we're going to put your name in the newspaper. And this was at a time when a lot of things were in the newspaper, including what he said to me. He said, Michael, I can drive drunk and get my name in the newspaper.
That's awesome.
What else can you do for me? And what he was basically saying is, don't come to me with the things that you think are important to you.
Right.
Ask me what's important to me.
Interesting.
And sometimes that's employee engagement. Sometimes that's an opportunity to serve on that organization's board. Sometimes it can be a business relationship. So it really is what we call listening the gift.
Right.
Listen for what that individual wants from this relationship, because they don't want a transaction. Are there people who give a gift to have you go away? Yes.
Sure.
But those are the ones that are just sideways energy.
It's not going to be a huge gift either, right? I mean, they're just trying to get you out of their life. It's going to be they're going to give you the absolute minimum that they have to give to make you go away. I mean, that's
right.
not what you're trying to do
and
anyway.
Believe it or not, we think we're being coy, maybe a little bit stealth when we do this, but people know why we're there. So let's just be honest about why we're there. And when people say, oh, they have deep pockets, we got to get in them. And I say, unless they keep their values in their pockets, there's no reason to get in.
Yeah, absolutely.
The values is what moves their heart, what moves their mind.
Absolutely.
And sometimes what moves what they're trying to do on their own in their community.
I love the story that you tell about the gentleman that said, I can drive drunk and get my name in the newspaper. That's absolutely beautiful. I'm going to tell a story of my own. And this goes back a number of years ago. I was running a manufacturing company. We had 3 plants across the Midwest, one in Iowa, one in Wisconsin, and one in Indiana. I won't tell you which plant because I don't want to give away the school district, but I got a letter from the CTE director, the Career and Technical Education Director of a school district. And they said, we're expanding our CTE program, and we're reaching out to local employers to support our project. And we would be very honored if you would consider a $25,000 gift to the project. That was a letter. Yeah, great. So I get this letter, and the guy calls like a week later, and he said, did he get the letter? And I said, yes. And he said, so are you interested in giving? And I'm like, I don't have any idea. I'm like, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know how it affects our business. I don't understand what you're trying to do for students, what you're trying to do for the community. So if the question is, will I give $25,000 to your random initiative at your school district? The answer is no. because I don't have any idea what you're doing. And he said, that's the same answer that I got from like everybody I've called. I'm like, well, no kidding. I mean, it was obvious to me, as somebody that spent, my lifetime in and around business development. Some people call it sales. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got, and it reflects back on how you just answered that last question, was you get you're way more successful in business development by asking the right questions than you will ever be by giving the right answers. And so, to your point, asking people what inspires them, asking people about them, and getting an understanding of how you can align your mission and the work you're doing with what's important to them. Super, super valuable. I think a lot of times people they don't pause to ask that question. So that's where we want to start. But, we get into the example of inspiring somebody, getting them excited, or in my case with the school district, which ultimately we supported them. I got to know not just the CTE director, I got to know the technical education teachers, I got to know the principal. We had a weird personal connection from way back when that I didn't even realize I had with that person. And eventually we supported that program, but it was because we learned what they were doing and how we could be a part of it. Um, the point of the question, though, Michael, is some of these projects sputter, like the guy that sent all his letters and wondered why the checks didn't come flowing in, and you see other ones that are just wildly successful. What's the difference maker?
I want to provide a little bit of grace to that CTE director because, in fairness, oftentimes organizations are so busy preparing what they want to ask for that they forget that the people they're asking or inviting never heard of it before.
Fair enough.
And so, what you described as the flow of, I said no right away, but once I got to learn more, I think a tip for people in our field would be make sure you're telling the community a lot more about what you're doing even before you get to that invitation, and then make the invitation. So I understand why that happens. And sometimes those are just pressures and demands on making sure we're doing the right things for whatever the purpose is that we're doing. But I think that what I see is, how do you raise $1 million?
Right.
Well, you raise $1 million by having $1 million idea.
Yep.
And oftentimes people say, well, we just need to go where the money is, and they don't forget about what they're really trying to do inside the organization. So first, whatever your amount is that you're trying to raise, make sure that it's realistic and you can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
Most organizations would not know what to do well with $1 million.
Sure.
They think they do, but in reality, they wouldn't. So take time planning for that. I think about it this way. When a football team gets ready for the 2-minute drill, long before they ever reach 2 minutes, they know what they're going to do.
Right.
We got to do the same thing in nonprofit organizations.
Yeah, that's a great example. I've got two go-tos when we talk to people about philanthropy and we talk to school districts that are interested in engaging with private donations, be they corporate or individuals or foundations or bequests or what have you. And the first one is the one that you just stated, and I don't want that to get lost on our audience. If you want $1 million, you have to have $1 million idea. And if you're just going because you need more operating funding because you need to continue to make payroll, and you can be doing really, really important work as somebody that, again, on a really, really small level, does a little bit of philanthropy, that's not inspiring to me. Just making sure that your team members have a job at the end of the year, that's important. I'm not saying you shouldn't focus on that, but that's not a reason to give. I'm not changing lives other than that one individual that's still going to have a job. What are you going to do with that funding? So if you want $1 million, you have to have $1 million idea. I repeat that over and over and over again. I think I told you I was going to give you credit 3 times and then steal it. I'm actually still giving you credit for that one. Yeah. And the other one is a former guest on the podcast. You and I have talked about this in the past, but Rich Barnhouse, who's the president of one of our local community colleges, technical colleges here in the state of Wisconsin, Waukesha County Technical College. He said, if you ask for money, you'll get advice, and if you ask for advice, you'll get money. And I've used that one over and over and over again because it's exactly right. If in that example of that local school district, if you ask for money, I'm going to come in and tell you what I think you should do with your program. If you ask me what I think you should do with your program, now I'm becoming inspired by what it is that you're doing. Is that part of the message of the $1 million idea?
It really is, but there's also, as I alluded to a bit earlier, there's the people we're talking to are more shrewd. They know why we're there. And so I like to couple those things. I'd like to ask you advice on what we're doing and to see if what we're doing makes sense for you enough to invest in it.
Okay.
And talk about that all up front. But
Yep.
Just to pretend we only want their advice is really feels a little bit now more and more disingenuous to me, that we have to be very transparent about the need because most of the time that it's known and people appreciate that transparency. So They can either say, yes, I'll be happy to listen to you, or, if this is going to be, if this is going to end and you inviting me to make a gift, let me tell you why the reasons aren't as good right now to do that, and respect that. It doesn't mean no forever. And I think that really helps the spirit of philanthropy and generosity when you approach it in a very sincere and candid and authentic way.
Well, you build credibility with that donor.
Great word. Credibility is a great word to use.
And if they know you're not just there to be in their pockets, but you're there to build that relationship, eventually that time is going to come when you can ask that individual, for maybe the timing is different for them. Maybe they're inspired in a little bit different way. I drive this back again to all the different, sales and business development lessons that we've learned over time. Another really early one for me was you get people that'll say, the reason that we'll always meet with you is because you never come and try and sell us anything. And I've had people tell me that in multiple businesses over and over and over again. And they're like, if we know you're just going to come in and try and get us to spend our money, eventually we're going to tell you that we're not interested in meeting with you. Whereas if you know that you're going to come in and share great ideas and we're going to build a relationship and so on, eventually if there's something that fits, then they'll be willing to invest in it. And I've just seen time and time again the difference between a business development person who just chases the money. This organization has a grant or a referendum, or they've got budget for this project inside of education or outside of it. That's one level of relationship. It's the individual that stops by when you know they don't have money, and you stop by just to chat and learn about their program, learn about the work that they're doing. And then when they have the wherewithal to be able to invest in something, you're their first phone call. And it's almost the same thing, right?
It is, and it's been a while since I looked at this data point, but it was once said that the space between somebody's first gift and their $1 million gift was about 20 years.
Wow.
Now, that's not always true.
Right.
We're seeing a change in wealth and capacity, certainly now more than the last time I checked on that number. But the point is, there's a space between a first gift and $1 million gift.
For sure.
And so what are we doing with these individuals in that space before they make that $1 million gift or a $500,000 gift, whatever it is, whatever is significant for them?
Absolutely.
And we have to be really, really mindful of that. And when we're not, that's when they feel like a wallet and nothing more.
Right, exactly. And so let's talk about this a bit. You've got, we're at the point now where, and you've made some great points. It's all about being upfront about what you're going to ask for, and maybe not the number, but to say, look, this is about philanthropy. This is about the potential of a gift, and not pretending that it's about something else. Certainly asking for their advice, asking for their input, understanding what their goals are, understanding what what's important to them. We've covered all that. There comes a point in that discussion, in that relationship, where we have to inspire that individual toward what it is that we're doing, right? So let's assume we've got that foundation, that groundwork, that foundation of trust has been built, the relationship is in place, and now we have to start talking about where the rubber hits the road, and that is inspiring this person toward being involved with our organization, whether it's financially or in some other fashion. What is your advice to people when you get to that point about how you inspire a giver?
I'm going to contradict what I've been doing for the duration of this podcast, which was giving a lot of data points. I did start with a story about Rodney.
You did.
And it's the stories. And I think one of the things that begins to inspire is when we can share the most impactful stories we can think about. Unfortunately, what happens is we tell the story from our perspective. But I think when we can bring the person who's been impacted by our programs, a recent graduate, someone who's got a certification, or whatever your area is, you're really going to make that interaction memorable for the person you're talking to. We
Sure.
call them natural partners.
Yep.
So who are the natural partners that you can bring to the conversation? Some organizations won't have their clientele or can't have their clientele be the ones to share their story in person, but to write a letter about them. And we don't need 100 stories. We need about 2 or 3 really good ones to
Right.
inspire.
Yep.
And when possible, invite that person to your house. And I don't mean your physical house. I mean your building. Let them come and see the work. Let them be on the street with you. Let them be in the kitchen with you. Let them be in the education center with you. Let them be in the applied learning lab with you,
Right.
so you can see this stuff happen. That's where the inspiration starts, because they're the ones who trigger it. You provide the opportunity as the organization, as the school, but their inspiration comes from what they see.
Absolutely.
Yo-Yo Ma was once asked, when do you know your music is finished? And he said, oh, my music's not finished until it enters the ear of the listener.
Interesting.
And that's exactly what we have to do in philanthropy.
Absolutely.
Bring people in and they'll hear it and they'll decide what they want to do.
Well, and I can tell you, as you and I were getting to know each other, and you invited me at the time to Junior Achievement of Wisconsin, and that's exactly what we did, right? I mean, we went out and into the facility. There were I think it was middle school students, if I'm not mistaken, that were there for their interaction with Junior Achievement. There's all this activity. They're doing these. Running these small businesses, learning about free enterprise, learning about financial management. I mean, in a really interactive, hands-on way that was appropriate for students of that age. And you see these students and their activity, and you see their teachers, and it's impossible not to be inspired by that. And that's and you didn't have to stand up and give some big lecture about all the great things that you were doing. We just stood in the middle of a room and watched it happen.
That's right.
And so I think that's you're certainly somebody who, as I have seen in person, practice what you preach. I'm not going to mention the donors, but I joined a Forbes 400 donor on a visit to several of the organizations that he had gifted money to and resources to over the course of time. And we were going back and we were looking at the effect of what those gifts had done. And so we were in this case, a K-12 school, a private school. And we did the tour. We sat around the conference room table and went through the formalities and so on with the individual that was leading that institution. And then we walked through the facility and we walked into a room where students were earning, in this case, they were certifications from the Smart Automation Certification Alliance. And the students were literally going through their gold assessments while we were going through the tour. And everybody knew that there wasn't a coincidence that was going on while we were in there. It wasn't a secret, but to be able to see that and to see that student celebrate after getting that gold certification and knowing in the heart of that individual that made that possible. There's actually several individuals that were there that made that possible. There's nothing you can say with a PowerPoint presentation that could ever come anywhere close to that experience. It feels like that's exactly what you're saying.
Exactly. And in that moment, what happens is this person that you're referring to is no longer one of our donors. In fact, they never were one of our donors, even though we treat them that way. We became one of their organizations.
That's awesome.
And when we can make that flip, they will be investors with us for the end of time.
The idea that this individual has partnered with the organization, that we are now their organization, we are their partner, they are not our donor. I love that way of thinking. And at that point in time, they want to be part of these great things. They feel like what you're doing, who you're inspiring, who you're serving is part of their philanthropy, and whatever wealth they've been able to create, whatever resources they have is now flowing back out through your organization to help people and help achieve and accomplish a goal that they have or a change in the world that is important to them, going back all the way to making sure that when we're having these conversations, that we're focusing not on what's important to us, but what is important to that giver. I know our superintendents, our CTE directors, our development people in our school districts and our college system and so on are hearing all this, and they're like, wow, I'm inspired, right? Now I'm starting to understand this equation around how we get in front of the right people, how we tell our story, how we listen to them first and understand what's important to them, and then cater our story to them, how we make sure that we're allowing them to engage with the individuals to the extent that we can, that we are serving and that we are benefiting. All of that is super, super important. And now they're saying, this is cool, but where do I start? I'm sitting in my office. I've got this, this great opportunity. I have this lab that I want to build. I have this equipment that I want to purchase. I have this curriculum and this program that I want to implement, but I have no idea where to get started. What do you tell them?
Write it down.
Okay.
I know it sounds simple, but we call this a case for support document or that inspirational paper. And if they aren't clear on a piece of paper what they really want, they're not ready yet to ask for a gift. Once they have their story down, they have assembled a couple of stories that support their vision. Now they're ready to begin to identify their natural partners. I think there's a disappointment at times when we're not going to be telling them, here are the 10 foundations to go write a grant to, because we don't know in their community who it is that might value what they're doing. So once you have their case for support, your stories are generated, your vision is clear, identify 10 or 15 people that you'd like to go share the story with. Once that happens, identify the natural partners. Do you have people on your board, on your school board, your PTO association, that can help you open those doors?
Right.
And oftentimes that's a really natural place for those individuals who don't like fundraising to be valuable. They can make that connection. But I caution again, it's not only to the people who are perceived, quote unquote, as having the deep pockets.
Right.
It's who might benefit from this. We hear about those stories of the person who has no children and passes away and leaves millions and millions of dollars to an organization, and they wonder why. Well, maybe it's because that's where they got their nursing degree and no
Right.
one really paid attention to them.
Right.
And those are offsets, but really the work can be done with a very focused, very concentrated, clear case for support, identify a vision, who are your natural partners, how much do you need, and what is your time frame. One of the challenges we oftentimes see is that people want the money in 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not going to be there. You got to have a
Correct.
horizon. You got to have a time frame that's realistic.
What's realistic?
18 months.
Okay. I mean, that I would have guessed it was even further out than that. I think, yeah, I mean, 18 months, I would almost say is if you can inspire people to give toward a program like that in a year and a half, that's not looking out halfway through your career. That's looking out over a relatively short period of time.
It is.
Yep.
And there's two parts to that real quickly. One is you have to be internally ready, because when you get that gift, you want to make sure you use it in the way the donor entrusted you to use
Yep.
it. And if you fall short, that word will get out. And you have to be externally ready, that there has to be an awareness, going back to your CT instructor, not just the letter, but that you have a really well-defined approach to inviting people into your story.
Absolutely. A couple points. I tell people a lot of times, and we see this in on the marketing and on the sales side of businesses that I'm involved in. You go out and you tell this great story, and you have this awesome idea, and the thesis is from, of course, the movie The Field of Dreams. Everybody's heard, if you build it, they will come, right? And my line is always, if you build it and they do come, you better be ready. Right. And because it's, it's not just getting them in the door and getting them excited, but now we've got to deliver on what it is that we promised them. And so in some cases, that 18 months is probably, that's even a pretty aggressive time frame to kind of vision out what you're going to do with this new lab, or what you're going to do with this new program. So on the other part of it in education is we're always planning a year ahead anyway. Students that are going into coursework this coming September signed up for it, a lot of cases, last January, right? So we have this horizon in education to be able to think and to prepare and to make sure that we've got that time to get where we want to be. The other thing that occurred to me, Michael, when you're talking about, they want us to be able to say, here are the 10 foundations that you should be applying to, and then they're disappointed when they find out that that's not the thesis, or that's not what we're telling them. I would say this, and we do a ton of grant work in a lot of the organizations that we're involved with. And, in fact, I'm working on a project right now where we're applying for NSF funding, National Science Foundation funding. And there's going to be 8 grants awarded across the United States. And they're going to be somewhere between, I think, like $1 million and $5 million. And so that's an organization that has money, and they're going to put that money to work, and they're going to do that in 8 projects. But they're probably going to get 1,000 applications. And of those 1,000 applications, 8 of them are going to be chosen. When you start thinking about how you create partnerships with the kinds of people that can support your work, and let's just take a K-12 school district, let's take a high school program, and I'm in a city of 60,000 people, I'm in a town 1,000 people, or whatever that number is, a village. You have kind of a captive group of employers. There's nobody from halfway across the country that can go to your local industrial employer, can go to your local philanthropist and inspire them. If you're sitting in the state of Nevada, inspire them about something you're doing in South Carolina. It's just not close enough to them to matter. But you can inspire them around what's happening in their own backyard. And I've got to believe that having that local connection, that personal connection, and enabling them to really visualize how engaging in this project is going to affect not just people in need, but people in need that they're interacting with every single day. Is that fair assessment?
That's absolutely right. And one of the things that we have to recognize, going back to the 64 cents of every dollar,
Right.
it's just not the industrial park where you want to be.
100%. Yep.
It's the coffee shop.
Yep.
It's the church, your house of worship.
Sure.
Wherever it is, there are people there who might be very interested in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
And I think the other thing I want to go back to, just because there is, in the numbers I provided earlier, about 64 cents of every dollar, that is actually has gone down a little bit. And there is I don't think it's a bright red light, but there's a little bit of a red light starting to flash around the number of households who are giving smaller gifts. We've actually seen a decrease in the total number of donors by about 5% year over year from 24 to 25. What's offsetting that is the larger gifts. So we're losing a little bit of the population who's given gifts of $500 or less.
Why is that?
I think there's some economical reasons why if if this costs more to live, they feel like they have less to give.
Sure.
But they're always going to find a way. One of the best gifts I've ever received was $1.15.
Love it.
Goes back a ways, but a woman said, I wish I could give a lot more, and I can't, but know that this is what I can give, and I really value your organization. Keep up the good work. We're praying for you.
Yeah.
And that was great.
That's awesome.
And so we don't know what. So sometimes it just means we have to work a little bit harder to get the amount we need from a few more people.
Yep, absolutely. I remember when I was a kid, and there was this story. The Milwaukee Road was like the age-old railroad, right? So and growing up in Milwaukee, obviously, soft spot in your heart for anything that's tied to your hometown. I was probably, and I'm guessing at the age, I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and the Milwaukee Road was going bankrupt, and I asked my parents if I could give $5 to the Milwaukee Road to help them, and they're like, well, number one, it's a private company. That's not the way it works, and your $5 probably isn't going to save them from bankruptcy. But
no, but I hope they said yes. Encourage
exactly.
your generosity.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in fact, I think the answer was if you want to give $5, maybe there's another organization where your gift could probably do a little bit more work. But to your point, it is those. It doesn't matter. It's really the size of the person's heart, not the size of the gift that matters. And inspiring somebody to give and being able to tell that story and knowing that the work that you were doing was important enough to somebody that, it's a Bible analogy too, but that $1.15 to that individual was probably more than, $1 million gift would be to a billionaire. I mean, so it's in terms of the, relative value to that individual and what they were willing to give of themselves. So, so super, super great. Great observation. I did cut you off when I said, why is that? You were going into some of the changes in the percentages and the fact that some of these other organizations are giving more. Anything you wanted to add before I?
We're just seeing that there are some constraints financially in households that we haven't seen before. But there's also a connection between a person's interested in volunteering and their giving. And I think we've seen a drop. I know we've seen a significant drop off in the number of people since COVID who are willing to go out and volunteer. I hope we get that back. I hope we instill that sense of we're all in this together, and whatever I can do is enough, even if I can't do everything.
Absolutely. So as we look at the state of philanthropy today and some of the moving pieces, and I love the way that you put, even if I can't do everything, you certainly want to do what you can. Let's look out to the future. I mean, should we be optimistic in education about philanthropy? Are there reasons for us to maybe think that the individuals who are giving today won't be as generous in the future? What are you seeing as you're looking forward?
Well, I see right now, and year over year, it's been pretty consistent that the top 3 sectors that are receiving philanthropy, house of worship, human services, and education. And human services and education flip-flop between 2 and 3 almost every year. This year happens to be 3. The year prior, it was the number 2. So there's a lot of money going toward education. What's incumbent upon us to keep that going, I think, in education is making sure that we're being realistic with what we can do. Mm-hmm. Within the scope of our services, but also ask ourselves, if we're going to be the same in 4 years that we are today, are we doing enough? Mm-hmm. And so while we don't want people to continue to innovate, although that's healthy at one level, it also burns people out. So how do we create that perfect union where the ideas are inspirational enough to generate the philanthropy? The other thing that we are seeing, and this was the first year, bequest giving was up almost 20% year over year. This is the beginning of this great wealth transfer that we've seen. Sure. And the numbers vary, and it varies widely. Some experts will say there's about $34 or $35 trillion that's going to be passed on to the next generation over the next 20, 40, 30 years, something like this. Sure. Others will be at like 100 trillion. It all depends on what are the people with the money right now going to do before they die? Right. Are they going to spend a lot more of it, or are they not? What are the tax laws that are going to impact that? It doesn't matter. 34 trillion is a lot of money, if that's even if that's the high side. So we're beginning to see that great transfer of wealth. Build the relationships now. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And you think about, some of the nonprofits that I'm involved with, and a lot of them fund their operating costs through endowments and through bequests and so on. And so, that longer term giving, you might, if you're talking to somebody, I've got a will, we've got, organizations named in the will. Good Lord willing, that's going to accrue to that organization 30 or 40 years from now, right? I'm not in any hurry to give that money away. But so that's kind of more of the long-term planning over the course of time. Do you see people
providing bequests to, to public educational institutions and school districts and so on, is that something that's realistic for folks to be thinking about?
It certainly is an avenue that they can take. It's easier if you have a partnership already with an existing education foundation within your district or your school, or
Sure.
certainly a community foundation. Most community foundations are positioned to accept gifts on behalf of what that donor wants to do with them. Donor advised funds
Yep,
are
sure.
very popular.
Yep.
Although the donor is not legally able to restrict their gifts to a particular organization, they're involved in the decision making. So
Right.
I would advise the listener that if you don't have a relationship yet with your community foundation, go explore a conversation.
Yep, absolutely. And to anybody who's a, medium net worth individual, or even not, and has interest in giving, a donor advised fund is a great way to do it, by the way. And this is a good point for us to mention that we're not giving tax advice, we're not giving financial advice, we're not giving legal advice. If you're going out and looking for philanthropic relationships, consult, whether you're a giver or somebody who's seeking that, consult professionals that are in that space, because that's certainly not our goal. But a donor advised fund, which enables you to basically create a fund of money, take the tax deduction in the year in which you make the gift to your DAF, and then direct that funding in whatever direction you want at any point in time in the future. So you can make a recommendation, which I have a donor advised fund. I've never had the administrator of that fund come back to me and say, oh no, we can't give to such and such, as long as it's a qualified 501c3
Exactly.
or a qualified organization. That gift gets made. And so that's a great way from the standpoint of individuals interested in giving to be able to take advantage of and manage some tax liability and so on an ongoing basis. But also, given the fact that those are out there, the opportunity for organizations that are seeking funding to recognize that that's another source of funding. But so many different ways for us to engage with givers, to inspire them around giving for the right projects, ones that are inspiring to them, ones that are fitting in line with whatever their personal mission is, asking all those right questions, building those relationships. I love the idea of sitting down and writing out your plan. And so often, just the fact of, this is a lesson I learned a long time ago, just the process of sitting down and writing something down manifests itself. Once you've gone through that process, taken the time, maybe you're not going to act on it tomorrow, but you're going to act on it at some point in the future. And so that's really, really important advice.
The other thing that plan does is it helps internally, as I talked about internal readiness. There's oftentimes a lot of friction around what are the priorities of philanthropy in an organization. And when you can use this document to kind of internally look at the friction points and reduce them, not always eliminate them, you're going to be better off when you go out to the individuals to invite in to support that organization.
Absolutely. This has all been super, super helpful, Michael. I'm going to mention before we go on to the final two questions I have for you, that you and I not too long ago did a webinar series, and we'll make sure we link that up in the show notes as well, so that people can go back and listen to and in that particular case, it was directly focused on individuals in the K-12 space and how they can engage with their with philanthropists and individuals willing to support their great work and their initiatives. So there's going to be a lot, even more nuggets than we were able to cover in the scope of a 60-minute podcast or what have you. So I would encourage people to go back and see those, and we'll link those up in the show notes as well. Before I ask my final two questions, any other pieces of advice that I didn't give you an opportunity to share with our audience along the way here, and then we'll wrap up with two more.
If an individual is in a position where they're able to make a gift, do that. I would recommend doing that in the constraints of your own values, not trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Mm-hmm.
I said that, alluded to, you don't have to do everything, but you could do something. And sometimes we're almost embarrassed that our gift isn't enough.
Right.
But know that to an organization that where every gift matters, it's one life, one opportunity that donor is helping create.
Absolutely. And it's the old another biblical reference is the old left hand, right hand, and the idea that so many people, I think, you should be giving because you want to change lives. You want to make the world a better place. It can be a contest among people to say who can have the bigger logo on the whatever, and that's all fine. And if that, that's a reason that somebody is giving, that's up to them, and certainly nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's not about competing with somebody else. It's about making a difference, and it's about doing what you can. Two more questions for Michael Frohna here as we're wrapping up our time. Questions we ask every single guest on the Tech Ed podcast. First one is this, and you've worked in and around education. Obviously, we're all products of our own, educational process and pathway, but you've worked in and around education for your entire career, or at least a good portion of it. Is there something that you believe about education that might surprise our audience, or something that might be a little bit different than they might hear elsewhere?
I was anticipating the question because I've listened to the other
Yeah,
podcasts,
right. Thank you.
and yet when I think about what is the driver, I think what I see, and this might have been reflective of what I actually heard on previous episodes, is that teachers today, and my father was a teacher for 40 years, so I
Awesome.
got to see this
Yep.
sort of
Well, and you
firsthand,
considered it as well. Yeah.
is that is the teacher the only one who can provide the learning? And when teachers are more comfortable relegating the learning and the teaching to their class,
Yep.
and you have peer-to-peer learning and they facilitate learning, I think some of the richness of the experience comes from that. So if we can get educators who are very professional, well-trained, to just be a little bit more comfortable with allowing their class to be the teachers, I think everyone wins.
I love that. Yeah, I'm reading a book right now as we record this called Multipliers, and it's a book that was published, I don't know, probably 15 years ago, and then republished again maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And it's the whole idea is that level 5 leaders, that the best leaders are ones that aren't necessarily handling every aspect of the organization, every single detail, making every single decision, but are empowering the rest of their organizations to basically take risks, think on their own, be willing to innovate and so on. And there's example after example from the education space. And it's interesting you say that because one of the examples, I forget the school, um, is about a teacher who was one of he was either loved or hated, first of all, but he was one of the people in the school that was pointed to by more students of having a huge impact on their life than any other teacher in the school. In fact, what it said was he got at the end of their high school journey, they would ask students which teacher had the biggest impact on you as a student. The number of times that individual teacher was mentioned as the answer to that question was more not just than any other teacher, but than all of the other teachers combined. And what the student said was exactly what you just said. He didn't get up and try and lecture us and tell us everything and impart his grand knowledge to us. He challenged us to think. He challenged us to, question each other and to have this basically this experience inside of his class where they were learning as a class, not just having this download of information from the teacher. And I think especially as we move into the future, then we get further and further away from the one to many, education model, which has been the kind of the foundation of education, at least here in the United States for, probably since the inception of our country, but it's certainly for the last 70, 80 or 90 years. As we get further and further away from that, we really are going to see this role of the teacher change. And I'm really glad that you made that observation. Would you describe your father as that kind of teacher?
He absolutely was.
Yeah. How so?
He would challenge people to, he was an English teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and he would challenge individuals in his class to tell them what they thought the meaning of the paragraph was or the chapter was about.
Mm-hmm.
And when he passed away, the number of former students who came to the services and shared with us how impactful my dad was on him,
Yeah.
on them, that was really meaningful.
That's awesome. I love that. All right. Final question. I know you're anticipating this one as well. And we're going to go back to that high school student, not some random high school student, but Michael Frohna as a high school student, 15-year-old sophomore in high school, way before even maybe thought about being a high school teacher, certainly before you got involved in all the philanthropy, all the incredible leadership opportunities you've had over the course of your career, all these opportunities to change lives across the spectrum. Go all the way back to that 15-year-old Michael Frohna. If you had one piece of advice for him, what would it be?
I was not a very good student. I got a courtesy D in chemistry, and I found my livelihood and my learning came from being involved in different organizations and theater and it felt to me when I look back that a lot of my decisions were sort of accidental. And I would go back and tell my 15-year-old self, and it's a bit of an overused word, I think, at times, is to be more intentional. I think I just let things happen and thought that other people got things because they were just working harder or smarter. And I realized that wasn't the case. It was maybe because they were more deliberate. And I
Yeah.
would tell my 15-year-old self from then to now, my point in life now is just be deliberate, be intentional, and do what matters to you, not necessarily what matters to everybody else.
That's awesome. Awesome advice. Yeah, I'm tempted to respond to that with a bunch of personal experiences, and I'm not going to because that was absolutely, absolutely perfect. But I couldn't agree more. And be intentional and do what you're doing because it's good for you and it's important to you, not because you're living up to somebody else's expectation.
We sometimes listen to the last voice or the loudest voice, and now it's time to listen to our own.
I love that. We're going to leave it right there with Michael Frohna. Michael, of course, as we mentioned, is the founder and vice president of Humaner. We'll link up some information on Humaner as well. As you've listened to Michael, I'm sure we've got lots and lots of educators that would love to engage with you. So we'll make sure that that's available. Some other ideas and some other documents and resources that we said we would link up in the show notes. We will do that. We have the best show notes in the business. We are going to put those at techedpodcast.com/Frohna. That is techedpodcast.com/FROHNA. Check them out when you're done there. Head over to social media. Check us out on LinkedIn. You'll find us on Facebook. We are also on Instagram. We are all over YouTube. Wherever you go for social, you will find the Tech Ed Podcast. And when you do, say hello. As always, we love to hear from our loyal listeners. And we love to have you come back each and every week. This is where we will be a week from today. My name is Matt Kirkner. I'm your host. Thank you for being with us.